So thank you for joining us. This is the Science of Learning webinar series, and today's topic is all about motivation, about moves to motivate students. And we have Dr. Ritter, who's going to be talking about the research behind motivation. We have Taryn Barrow, who's going to be talking about the classroom strategies and pedagogical approaches from a professional learning perspective. And we're so excited and happy to have them present for us today. They have fantastic content, knowledge, and expertise. And I am so excited because this is going to be a great conversation. So thank you for everyone for joining us. If you're just joining us now, please drop your name, where you're from, and your job title into the chat so we can meet you. Looks like we have folks from all over the country and even internationally as well. How fantastic. So nice to see all of you here. We are seeing folks from Maryland, from California, Illinois. We have math teachers. We have a third grade teacher. Fantastic. This is so exciting. Well, keep telling us your name and where you're from and what your job title is. Oh, from Peru, New Zealand. So cool. As I introduce our speakers today. So again, today's webinar topic is Moves to Motivate Students, Research-Backed Strategies from the Science of Learning. And actually, before I introduce our speakers today, a couple housekeeping points. After today's webinar, the recording will be available for everybody. You'll get it in your email. A certificate of completion is available upon request. All you have to do is email us at webinars@carnegielearning.com. The live transcription is enabled, so if you'd like to turn on or off your subtitles at the bottom, you have the opportunity to do so. And there will be a survey at the very end, so you can give us feedback, tell us what you like, tell us what you want to see more of next time. So stay tuned for the link to that at the very end. And we invite you to continue the conversation in the chat today. We're going to be asking you a bunch of questions, hoping to get a lot of audience participation today so we can have a really collaborative learning experience. We do also have the Q&A box. If you'd like to submit something there, we are monitoring that. All right, so I'm so delighted to introduce you to our speakers today. We have Dr. Steve Ritter. He is founder and chief scientist here at Carnegie Learning, and he has been developing, analyzing, and evaluating educational technology for over 20 years. He's earned his PhD in cognitive psychology at Carnegie Mellon University and was instrumental in the development and evaluation of cognitive tutor for mathematics. He's the author of numerous papers on the design, architecture, and evaluation of intelligent tutoring systems and other advanced educational technology. And he currently leads the research team here at Carnegie Learning. Taryn Barrow, she is the Director of Professional Learning in the West. She joined our professional learning team in 2019, before which she was a secondary mathematics coordinator for a school district in El Paso, Texas, overseeing mathematics instruction in grades 6 through 12. She has a degree in mathematics with a minor in physics. And over the course of 10 years in the classroom, she taught 8th grade math through pre-calculus at Title I schools serving communities with large EL populations. So we're so delighted to have you join us to hear them speak today. Really briefly, I wanted to go over what our agenda looks like before I turn it off to hand it off to Dr. Ritter. If you could go to the next slide, Taryn. We're going to very briefly have Dr. Ritter establish what is motivation. How are we talking about it? How are we defining it? What does research say about it? Before we jump into 3 different topics about motivation. Each of these 3 topics, sense of belonging, learner autonomy, and culture of motivation, will include Dr. Ritter sharing some research about these topics, Taryn sharing some classroom strategies about these topics, and then also for each topic, we'll open up a conversation with you, our audience participants, having the opportunity to submit questions for a brief Q&A for each topic. So that's what we're going to do today. And without further ado, I'd like to turn the time over to Dr. Ritter.
Thanks, Amy. First, I'll invite people to also comment on their thoughts about motivation. But I'll say one of the ways that I frame talking about motivation is the story that we tell about why we do what we do. And this comes from a research framework that really connects personality, individual traits and beliefs, that we have, relatively long-term and stable aspects of our personality that affect what we call in the academic world metacognitive behaviors. So metacognitive behaviors are behaviors and thoughts about learning. So studying for an exam, doing your homework, showing up to class, paying attention, asking yourself questions, testing your own knowledge, are all kind of metacognitive behaviors. Those are the things that you really control, and those lead to outcomes. So you see your learning in the real world, and then there's a feedback loop that your outcomes tend to affect your traits and beliefs about yourself. So if you see that you study hard, you do well on a test, let's say, that might change your belief, at least a little bit, about the value of studying hard. But the truth is, again, getting back to the story of, that we tell ourselves, that outcome doesn't come with that kind of label on it. It's really about how the student internalizes things. So if the student, for example, attributes the results on the exam to, oh, well, that was an easy exam, right? It may not have that effect where you suddenly feel more competent. Or if you feel that you did well on the exam because you're really smart and not because you worked hard. That also might feed back in the sense of maybe next time you don't work as hard because you kind of feel like you didn't need to because you had this innate ability. And so when we think about motivation, we're always thinking about how people explain to themselves what drove various outcomes that they see in the world. I have a couple of Calvin and Hobbes cartoons. Calvin and Hobbes, it's an older comic strip, but it's really great. And there are a lot of really good examples of Calvin, who's a kid in school, thinking about and expressing some of these motivational principles. And this one particularly, I think, is important in distinguishing what we call situational interest and true motivation. So situational interest is more like in the moment, how you feel about what you're doing. And motivation, like I said, is the kind of residue, the impact of that on your self-image and about how you tell the story about what you're doing. So, you can see in this comic, Calvin's saying, I'm not going to learn this material until you make it, unless you make it enthralling. That's the situational interest. And the teacher says, and what will you do the rest of your life if it doesn't entertain you every minute? And Calvin says, wait, you think I'll live someplace that doesn't get cable? It's a little bit dated. Now it would be Netflix maybe, but you see the point, right? That the truth is, one of the reasons we focus on kind of long-term motivation and the impact on students' self-image is that some of the situational interest things will wear off and also may not apply to the outside world. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad. Obviously, making students entertained, excited, engaged in the moment is really important, but it's not enough. We have to focus on the impact of what that has long-term.
Thank you, Dr. Ritter. So now that we've kind of established the difference between situational interest and motivation, and how motivation is the story that we tell ourselves about what drove us to do things, the first topic we're going to dive into is motivation increases when students feel a sense of belonging in the learning environment. So at this point, I'd like to ask all of you who are attending today to enter into the chat. What do you do to make students feel welcome and that they belong in your class, school, or district? And I'm going to send that out into the chat as well, the question. So take a few seconds to think about it and tell us, what do you do to make your students feel welcome and that they belong in your class, school, or district? So we're already seeing some great responses come in. Emily tells us that she assigns roles to each student, like discussion leader, note taker, de-escalator, recapper. This way, every student knows that they're heard, seen, and have a specific purpose in the class. David tells us that Greeting and knowing students helps them feel a sense of belonging. Taking a personal interest, using their name, greeting them, listening to them, engaging in conversations about their activities outside of class, greeting them by name again, great. Complimenting them for specific things, community building circles, collecting an interest inventory and share overall and unique points. Oh, share overall and unique points. Again, personally greeting them every day at the classroom door. Really, we can't overstate how such a simple act can make such a big difference. Oh, using different puppets to greet them. Maybe a topic. Love that. Saying hello, smiling. Oh, I am not keeping up with all these fantastic comments that are coming in. I didn't realize how behind I was. Well, you can all see them in the chat, I think, for all of our live attendees. Thank you so much for sharing. Keep sharing them. And we're gonna see, actually, we're gonna go back to Dr. Ritter, who's gonna share with us a little bit about what research tells us. So Dr. Ritter, what does research tell us about how belonging impacts motivation?
Sure. So the sense of belonging, there's been a lot of recent research looking at this sense of belonging, whether students feel comfortable, welcomed, and kind of appropriately situated in the learning environment. And there's a particular impact on the sense of belonging at academic transitions. So in particular, from elementary school to middle school, that's an age where students often start to question. In elementary school and younger kids, often they listen to what adults do. They don't start to take their own opinions and approach on thinking about, why am I doing this, right? They're doing it because the adults have told them to. In middle school, that starts to shift. And students start to question, well, why am I doing this? And that leads to questions about, well, do I really belong in the place where I am? And that can particularly be an issue for students who are a minority within their school. If they feel there's a phenomenon called stereotype threat. So if students feel like they're somehow representing their gender, their race, or some other characteristic because they're one of a minority, and so they feel like there's more pressure on them to succeed and represent not just themselves, but a group. That can put pressure on students, so we need to consider that. And I think a lot of the suggestions in the chat are exactly in line with what you want to do to increase a sense of belonging, is make sure that students feel welcome and seen and recognized within the classroom. So I love the ideas about greeting students by name, giving them roles or calling out to them explicitly, and just making sure that everyone feels like their classroom, their school, and more generally the school environment is kind of centered around them, or at least reacting to them. So you can see the Calvin Hobbes strip here is exactly on target there, in that Calvin is saying he doesn't like school, but his dad says, you like to read, you like to learn, you've read every dinosaur book ever written. And Calvin says, yeah, but we don't read about dinosaurs in school, right? So Calvin clearly feels that the school isn't responding to his own interests, not recognizing him as a person. And so that's really the key to giving students a sense of belonging in their schools.
Thank you. So now we want to turn over to Taryn. Taryn, will you tell us what are some classroom strategies or school strategies that foster belonging, which leads to academic achievement?
So a lot of the things that have been mentioned in the chat tie into that sense of belonging right on track. So getting to know your students is absolutely crucial. So playing, for instance, get to know you bingo. So having that conversation with students, getting to know their interests, getting them to exchange ideas. So a simple game. So you can play that. You can have, yes.
I interrupt for 1 second. The sound seems like a bit off. There's a little bit of a reverb.
Is it better?
Unfortunately, no. Sorry, folks. Thanks for being patient with us. Everything sounded fine in the setup.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what happened. Yes, it does sound like there are two devices. Do you have two mics, Taryn, on your computer or
Yeah,
computer?
I just have the one. Does it sound
You sound better.
that,
okay? Are we
All right,
good?
thank
Okay.
you. Yes. And if you want to move to the next slide, Taryn, yeah.
Okay. So, like I was saying, sorry about that. So, getting to your students at the beginning of the year, getting them to have those conversations about who they are, that is really crucial. So, one instance, an example that you can use to do this is playing Get to Know You Bingo. So, you have bingo boards set up with different ideas or characteristics. Do I have siblings? Where am I from? And then this also gets the students talking to each other, having those conversations to get to know each other. And as we know, some students are a little more reluctant to have those conversations out loud, to stand up and introduce themselves. So in my own class, I used Get to Know Me videos. So I gave students the option to create a short clip that would introduce themselves. So that did help students that were a little more reluctant. So then that allowed them to have that space to express themselves. I have also seen in some schools where they take, and I've done this myself, taking a few minutes, you set a timer at the beginning of the classroom, at the beginning of the class period, and you just give students a chance to share, celebrate that little conversation. So then they're building connections with each other. You're getting insight in who they are, how things are going for them. And it also makes them feel like people care about them personally. And just like going back to what Dr. Ritter also mentioned, is making things relatable and incorporating their interests. So the reading books about dinosaurs. So are your students interested in dinosaurs? Are your students interested in space exploration? So including those things in your curriculum, it also provides students with a sense of belonging.
Thank you. Now we'd like to open up a few minutes for question. We're going to enter into like a mini Q&A session for a few minutes. So I would love to ask our participants to submit questions into the chat about this topic of how a sense of belonging impacts motivation. So while you're thinking of questions you can submit to ask either Dr. Ritter about research, to ask Karen about any classroom or school strategies about sense of belonging, I will kick us off by, and again, feel free to submit them in the chat. I would like to kick us off by asking Dr. Ritter and Taryn, how do current conditions of learning during a pandemic affect students' sense of belonging and motivation?
Yeah, I'll start. A really good question, because students have been very disconnected from their school environment, from their friends, from their teachers when they're learning remotely. And then also more generally stressed from sickness they may have in their family and other disruptions to their lives outside of school. So I think making students, there's almost a re-engagement that we need to do with some students to make them feel welcome again at the school, even if they felt welcome before. And so that there's starting to be some research on that, on how we re-engage with students and help them understand, feel a part of the school, and also lead to it affects their participation, right? Because they, particularly younger kids, may kind of forget what it's really like to collaborate with their peers and to act appropriately in school environments.
And I would like to connect with what Dr. Ritter just said. So working in schools currently and working with teachers, I have seen this firsthand. So students are learning how to adapt. Students and teachers are learning how to adapt to school all over again. There were a couple of years where it was difficult to build those connections, and seeing kids every day. And then even when we first returned in person, students wearing masks and then having that connection with your students. So there have been definitely strides, but as we continue, we'll see change.
We have a bunch of great questions in the chat. I'm going to try to consolidate some of them. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but keep asking your questions in the chat because we will try to answer them after the webinar and send out a follow-up email. But there's one question about, there are students who have been in classes together for multiple years, and maybe they already all know each other. How do you continue that sense of belonging with students like that? And also, part B is when you have students who have been together for a long time, maybe since first grade, and now they're in sixth grade, and they're new students who join. How do you help new students feel welcome and a sense of belonging when they're coming into a group who already know each other?
So I can start. So when there are new students and the other students are more familiar with each other, I definitely think the activities where you are getting to know each other, but you can include different kinds of facts so that the students that already know each other learn a little more about each other. And then it also includes the students that are not, that are new, so they're not familiar with anyone. Having those mingling conversations, so it would be, encouraging those structured conversations with the students, so then they are up and talking with each other. So encouraging those conversations, anything that you can do to get them to build connections with each other, that would help with students that are newer to a class.
And I just add a lot of monitoring as well to make sure that the new student is being welcomed into the environment and understanding how well that's going. And sometimes directly talking to that student as well to understand how they feel about their integration into a new school or a new class.
Thank you. Another question is, how do you best recommend that students remain engaged in their lessons? Catherine has found it difficult to have all students stay engaged because their interests tend to vary greatly.
Yeah, I can address that a little bit. So, obviously when you're giving the same lesson to all students in the class, it may resonate better with some students than others. And so partly you want to mix that up a little bit, like don't use sports analogies for every lesson because some students may resonate with that, other students might not. But also there's a lot of, I think, informal cues that you give to people. So, in math, if you're teaching, the relationship between an independent and dependent variable or some mathematical relationship, often like students will, if you're helping a student, just little cues like saying, oh, well, you play soccer. So here's an example from soccer, right? Or you play piano or whatever the student's interest is. It's not so much that we did some research on this. It's funny. It's not so much that the example is going to engage them with particular knowledge about music or sports or whatever their interests are. It's really almost just an acknowledgement from the teacher that, oh yeah, I know something about you. I can relate to you. I care about you as a person. And that really makes a big difference.
Thank you. So the next, I think we have time for one more question. Let's see, let's go with, there are some questions about how to support students who maybe seem like they're apathetic about school, or they are feeling a lack of confidence or anxious. It seems like there are a lot of questions about when students come to class feeling a variety of emotions that prevent them from feeling motivated. How would you address that?
Acknowledgement of that feeling, I think, is a good place to start. Coming from anxiety, how is that student feeling? What is causing the anxiety? Helping them process those emotions. So before you can address content or begin to teach, you do have to address what they're feeling, those emotions. How do we get them to feel safe? That would be, so having, communicating with students, getting them to recognize and be able to articulate what it is that they need at that time.
Yeah, I would also emphasize helping the student understand how much they have in common with other students, even if they don't see it. So if you're a student who feels anxious and shy and less capable or something in class, and so you're not speaking up or participating as much, understanding that other students may also feel that way. They just externally don't express that as much. And even that student might not be expressing it as much as they think they are. And so just constantly reminding or helping students understand that what they're doing is on the kind of normal spectrum of the way other students feel in their class as well, helps increase the sense of belonging and make them feel more comfortable.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our next key tenet of motivation, but these questions are so excellent in the chat. Feel free to answer each other if you want to keep the conversation going in the chat, and continue asking questions so that we can maybe circle back to them down the road after the webinar and keep the conversation going. But the next key tenet of motivation that we want to discuss now is that students need to feel autonomy over their learning. They need to feel like they can own their own learning. So would like to take just 30 seconds really quickly for folks in the chat to tell us, share, how do you help your students have autonomy over their own learning? And I'm gonna throw that in the question in the chat too, just so you could see it. Again, the question is, how do you help your students have autonomy over their learning? I'd love to hear what's been working for you. Yeah, so share it in the chat. Okay, so I'm seeing project-based learning, letting students have choice over their own topic, giving them voice, a choice box for project methods, peer assessment, writing journal, giving opportunity to do fix-its on their math, excellent, or project-based learning. Megan shares, we have learning intentions and success criteria posted so they know what they're learning and how they know they've learned it. That's excellent. Yeah, seeing a lot of project-based learning, love that. I love that. Voice and choice, exactly, 100%. Yeah, keep sharing what's working for you in your schools and classrooms. And we're gonna turn it over to Dr. Ritter. Dr. Ritter, will you share with us what research tells us about student autonomy?
Sure. You can read the Calvin Hobbes cartoon while I'm talking. But I think autonomy is really key in thinking about the role that it plays in the kind of student's journey through education, because autonomy is really kind of the glue that helps extrinsic rewards become internally rewarding. So autonomy is about taking ownership of your own learning, feeling good about it on your own, even if it's not externally rewarded. So people often talk about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic meaning things that come from the outside, so often rewards, praise, external stuff. And intrinsic really comes from your own sense of satisfaction with learning. And there's nothing wrong with external rewards, or at least not inherently. Sometimes they can be excessive. And when I talked earlier about motivation being the story that you tell about yourself, sometimes if students are extrinsically rewarded, they actually decrease their intrinsic motivation because they say, well, I only did that because, if you pay me to do my homework, or if you pay me to do well on a test or to study or something, right? There's always a chance that a student will take that as saying, well, the only reason I studied hard is because I got paid. If I'm not getting paid, I'm not doing that anymore, right? So it can sometimes backfire, but if the student takes ownership of their learning, if it's incorporated with this sense of autonomy, that's the way the student will internalize that motivation and understand that they have control over their own learning. So in the literature, one of the big themes in the literature is what's called self-regulated learning. So it's about making good choices about what to do to increase your learning, like studying, but also self-testing, and also sort of having internal monologues and with yourself, asking questions as you read. So being an active reader, for example, is part of self-regulated learning, and then also continually kind of questioning your state of knowledge, right? So do you actually understand this stuff? So a lot of people, particularly in reading, will get into a state where the words are going into your brain in some sense, but they're not really sticking. I always had this experience, well, not always, but sometimes when I'd read to my kids a bedtime story, it's kind of amazing. You read, or you're reading out loud, so clearly, like, the words are going into your brain and coming out your mouth, but are totally thinking about something else, right? And then my daughter would say, "Now, who's Tom in this story?" And I have no idea, because I haven't really been listening. A lot of people read that way, and so anyway, being aware of how you're self-monitoring your understanding as you go through is part of what gives you ownership about over your learning. And then, as a lot of people have said in the chat, giving students choices helps them create that sense of ownership and taking ownership over what they've learned as well.
Thank you. Taryn, will you share some classroom strategies that you've seen work?
Yes, so facilitating project-based learning and problem-based learning. So that allows students to take their own road to finding the solutions, to determining how to get to the final answer. Student-led conferences also foster this idea where students are able to set goals for themselves and then be part of making the plan in order to help them reach their goals. So it puts them right into the center of owning what where they would like to end up and in their growth. Giving students actual choice in their pathway. So math menus, also known as choice boards, that is a great way to foster that choice. So giving students a clear pathway. We still have our objective. We still know what it is we want them to do, but then giving them actual options on how they get there. Another thing, and it is teaching students how to track their data. So where am I in my learning? And then giving them, instead of the same path for all students, this is where I am in my learning. So now this is the milestone. So as they achieve milestones, allowing them to progress. So I've seen this even done in an elementary school. Students were aware of their data was charted, and then the students knew what activity to do at the stations as they rotated, and the teacher worked with small groups. So they knew what it was that they were going to do at that station and how they're going to interact, because they were able to move on as they reached milestones, as they were able to read and understand their own data.
Thank you. Now we have about 5 minutes to do another mini Q&A session, so feel free to submit questions into the chat on this topic of student autonomy. And we already have a great question here that I think we can kick off with, which is, what do you recommend? How do you motivate a student if they're given a choice and still aren't motivated to do the assignment or project or assessment?
So there are really, even if you do a choice board, a math menu, there's still a limitation to the number of choices that you can put on there, obviously. Then that motivation comes from possibly the goal in mind. So I am going to do this, and why am I doing this? So it's not just getting them to do the what, but also then getting them to understand why.
Great, thank you. So understanding not just the what, but the why can help motivate. Sorry, Dr. Ritter, did you were you about to say something?
I was going to comment. There's a number of like really great comments in the chat that I wanted to talk a little bit about. One was on the importance of having students show their thinking. So when we talk about autonomy and choice, it's not always it's not just the choice of the kind of, let's say, real world context that math is being put in or the book to read. It's not always the content, but it's also accepting of different ways of thinking and student solution strategies. One of the things that I think is tremendously demotivating for students is when they talk about how they're thinking about a problem or how they're solving it, right? Which is really putting yourself out there. And the teacher says, well, that's fine, but in this class, here's how we do this, right? And, when you relate back to belonging as well, right? That's really kind of a way of saying, well, the way you're thinking about this is not, part of where we are. And there was another comment about relating to standards and, how do you maintain the rigor in things? And the way to think about it is, certainly in a lot of my work in mathematics, we look at less formal, non-algebraic strategies that are perfectly legitimate for problem solving, right? And often what happens is teachers might, like I said, reject those strategies because they want students to do it in a formal way. And I think what you want to do instead is provide a bridge between that informal strategy and the formal strategy that you want to teach, right? So you don't necessarily need to require that rigor or abstraction or formality up front. And that gives you a way to kind of say, like, yeah, the way you're thinking about it is great. And let me show you how this, this method that you're using relates to the way we would express that, let's say, in formal algebra or relating it to the standards there.
Thank you. We got a really interesting question about how, going back to what you were talking about, Dr. Reed, at the beginning of this hour, about the difference between situational learning, situated. I'm butchering it. Sorry.
Situational interest, yeah.
Situational interest and motivate and more long-term deep-seated motivation. How do you differentiate between some of these techniques, whether it's about choice or whether it's about, creating a sense of belonging? Which of these techniques are situational? Which of these are more about intrinsic motivation? And how can we think about those two differences?
Taryn, you want to go first?
So when you're thinking about the more long-term kind of motivation, getting students to understand and be able to plan out their goals. So the ones that involve having students see how they're going to reach their goals, allowing students to see where they are in their progress. Those kind of things move towards a longer term motivation. Whereas in the moment, students may be more motivated to do something on their choice board. But then if we see long term, where is this going? How am I getting there? What am I doing to progress towards that goal? Then that further pushes it towards more of a beyond a situational to more of a long-term understanding of further motivation.
And I'd say there's a tendency to think of a contrast between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, or between a lot of these things. And often it's not one or the other. it's a little bit of each, right? So like I said before, the intrinsic, we want students to feel good internally, when they learn. So feel good about having learned. But that doesn't mean that extrinsic motivation isn't also involved. So there was another comment in the chat about getting students to embrace struggle, and that's one of the hardest things I think in education is that, of course, if you're learning something, you're going to be confused. You're going to be making mistakes, right? If that weren't true, you're probably not really learning anything. And so understanding that that's part of the process, right? That's again normal for everyone to go through. I think it's really important. We have at Carnegie Learning this award we call the First Pancake Award. In recognition of the fact that whenever you make pancakes, the first one, the pan's too hot or too cold, or you forget to flip it or whatever, the first pancake never seems to turn out perfect, right? And explicitly rewarding that is one way to kind of give the message that this struggle is rewarded, right? That it's not always about the result that you get. Sometimes it's about the effort and then about how you build on that for the second pancake, which will be much better.
Maybe our teachers and educators here in the audience should start giving away first pancake awards to their students.
Everyone likes pancakes.
Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone's questions, comments, sharing your stories. We're going to move on to the third and final key tenet about motivation. And again, we're going to open up the chat to if you'd like to share what you're doing on this topic. But the final topic is kind of looking beyond the individual teacher or educator's actions and looking at the full system, the environment. So the idea is that school culture and classroom learning environments should foster motivation. So Dr. Ritter, what can you tell us about what research says about this?
Yeah, so there's lots of elements of school culture that come into this. You can see, again, in the Calvin cartoon, Calvin's clearly in the third panel, which has a lot of words, he says, I memorized this utterly useless fact, right? So he's attributing his learning really to an environment that he doesn't value or doesn't relate to, right? He doesn't think that what he's learning is really important, and that's really where school culture comes in, right? It's setting the expectation. When we talked about embracing struggle, a lot of people have heard about Carol Dweck and others' work on growth mindset. The idea that you really can get smarter, that you can become more capable through this kind of struggle, through making mistakes and learning. A lot of students really just don't have that understanding that things get easier as you practice in the same way that they often do have in sports. So most people understand that if you practice in sports, you get better. But somehow in academic subjects, maybe because it is more internal, students don't always recognize that they really do have the capability to get better. And that once you do get better, things get smoother and easier. So constantly, and I'll also say with respect to growth mindset, there were certainly a while ago, some studies that kind of had a very quick and lasting impact just by an intervention, but usually that doesn't happen. Usually it is a culture thing. It's something that needs to be reinforced again and again. Nobody's gonna decide suddenly that studying is worthwhile just because of one bit of instruction from a teacher. And so we think about how do we give students active engagement with the concept of growth mindset, that making mistakes is okay because it helps you learn, for example, which comes out of that. And then also giving students a sense of purpose. So we're doing a study now with the University of Wisconsin and Carnegie Mellon University that's looking at what academically they call utility value, but it's really the value of, in this case, mathematics to students' lives, and looking at how to frame different areas of mathematics. So we have students talking about, for example, when they're doing exponential functions, talking about a TikTok video and how it kind of grows virally, right? Goes viral. That's really an exponential function. And so trying to find context that helps students understand the value of mathematics, and then looking at how that impacts their willingness to work, their value in the subject matter in the first place, and ultimately their outcomes.
Thank you, Dr. Ritter. Karen, we'd love to hear what your thoughts are on what actionable strategies we can share with our educators here.
So I would absolutely agree with Dr. Ritter. This is a embedded, constant cultural thing built in. So you would see this in this campus affecting all students, with all of the stakeholders involved in this motivation. In building that understanding with all stakeholders being involved, one thing I have seen is breakfast with the principal. And actually, to extend that, I worked with a superintendent that would block out an hour of his day every day and visit a school and have lunch in the cafeteria with students. And those students really felt like they mattered. He would sit there and listen to their concerns. So that really gave them a sense of belonging in that environment, like what they felt was what they had to say was valued. Also, fostering an environment that is open to discussion and conversation. So if the classes, if the culture of the school is encouraging students to be able to share their viewpoints, share their opinions openly, and be able to exchange ideas, that helps students also feel like they have a sense of belonging. Some things that can be done in classes are Socratic seminars, philosophical chairs, four corners. So those kind of things, getting students to engage in those conversations where they're able to express how they feel and be able to have that communication back and forth. Inclusive spirit weeks and cultural celebration events, those, sometimes it feels a little, might feel a little cheesy, but in reality, it really does help students feel that sense of belonging, and then also helps them feel like they are excited to come and to do things. We had a salsa competition, so the Spanish classes would have all of the students make their family's recipe for salsa or queso, and then the teachers would vote on them. So, and so those students were really excited to share a part of them and who they are. And a recognition of not only achievement, but also progress and growth. So we cheer on the final tier. You've reached the top tier, good for you. And some students, they will struggle to reach that top tier. So celebrating them as they achieve different milestones, as they've grown, then that also keeps them motivated and keeps them going. We also, an example of that, as progress and as you keep going, we have a challenge that we pose to students. We have with our software, so we have a Mathia challenge, and students are then rewarded for completing a certain number of workspaces or how much time they spent there. So then they are, extrinsically motivated to complete that, but then they also have that sense of accomplishment and achievement.
Thank you so much. These are all such great suggestions. I'd like to open it up about 5 minutes to our participants to share both how you set up your class, school, district culture to foster motivation, whether it's what do you do to help establish an environment where students feel like they belong, that they have autonomy over their own learning or other ways of motivation. And also, what questions do you have on this topic about fostering a class, school, or district environment of motivation? And while we're kind of waiting for your comments to come into the chat, I was reminded, if it's okay for me to share, the second suggestion here, Taryn, fostering an environment that allows for open discussion, where the opinions of others are respected. I think back to when I was in high school. Our high school mascot was controversial, and so there was a debate where our senior, there were selected seniors who were up on the stage, went up on the stage in front of the whole school and debated pros and cons to keep or not to keep the mascot. And then the whole school voted. And it really did, in retrospect, now that we're talking about this, created an environment, a whole school-wide climate of open debate and discussion and being able to disagree with each other graciously, and all of us having a say in the outcome of the school. And so that really, I think, speaks. I mean, that was my personal example of how this kind of played out in real life. Yeah, so I'm seeing a couple of ideas for what some of our participants do to create such a learning environment. So we have Rebecca, who shares, my door is always open, so students are able to come in for questions or clarifications for any subject before school, during both lunches, even though Rebecca has a class during second lunch and after school. So having an open door policy, that's excellent. Let's see. Emily's school has an opinion board, a smaller ongoing version of what I was talking about. That's fantastic. That's really setting up an actual system and environment in place for open discussion. In our lower school, we do a leadership trait every month. Each classroom and grade has a leader chosen. One of our traits was persistence and not giving up. Each month we have leaders, and they aren't always the smartest or best students. It's who demonstrated the trait best. That's fantastic. That's really speaking to what Taryn, what you're talking about as far as recognizing students for maybe non-traditional achievements, right? Not just getting the highest grade or something like that, but other values and traits that are valuable, that are contributing to the school environment. Monthly rewards for students who show responsibility, open-mindedness, appreciativeness, and resilience. ROAR, Kristen says. I love that acronym. Is that an acronym? Yes, I think it is. Yes. Fantastic. All right. Well, I think we are pretty much wrapping up at this point. Do you have any final thoughts or any final, advice for any of us, Dr. Ritter and Taryn, to end on?
I feel like there's been so many great ideas from the participants here that this has been really really enlightening to hear everybody's different ideas, and we will try and capture those and echo them out again after the webinar.
Absolutely, I will second what Dr. Ritter shared, and I think it's an ongoing process, and it's learning, and there's not a one size fits all solution, but from all the participants there have been great suggestions, so I'm definitely a proponent of see it, steal it, make it work for you.
Yeah, and it is sometimes different in different environments. So it'll work differently for different schools.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much to all of our participants who shared their stories and questions, and we'll definitely want to keep this conversation going. If you can go to the next slide, Taryn. We do have a feedback survey that we would love for you to fill out. I'm going to actually also drop the link into the chat, but the QR code is here if you would like to just scan it with your phone. We always want to hear what you thought, what we can do better, what you want to hear about next time. And we would also love to invite you to our next webinar, which is on May 10th at the same time as today's was. And the topic will be on the science of playful learning. So we're actually going to have two presenters, just like we had today, talk about the pedagogy of play and the instructional design that incorporates play-based learning into curricula. And we're so excited for that next installment of our Science of Learning webinar series, and we really hope you can make it. If you could go to the next slide, Taryn. Oh, sorry, before we go to the next slide. I just want to remind you all that you will get a recording of today's webinar. And if you'd like a certificate of completion, all you have to do is email us at webinars@carnegielearning.com, which is right there on the middle of the screen. And next slide. And just a quick little plug for one of our professional learning services that Taryn actually is one of our directors of delivering. We have 5-day academies where we come to you and deliver professional learning for math or literacy. And there is a site here if you would like to learn more. We would love to hear from you, and I'm going to drop that in the chat here if you're interested. We will send the survey via email. In our follow-up email you'll get in a few days, you'll get the recording, you'll get the survey link, and you'll get an opportunity to email us back with a request for a certificate if you'd like. But that is today's webinar. We are so grateful that you joined us. This was a fantastic conversation, and it was fantastic because all of you were here and sharing all of your thoughts, opinions, questions. You really made this a valuable hour that we all spent together. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll see you at the next webinar. And feel free to find us on social media. Feel free to reach out. If you have any feedback at all, we're always here listening and here to support you. Thank you so much for all you do for your students, and have a great rest of your day.